The temps are dropping in Ohio, and there's one thing that we can think about right now, and that's a nice beef roast in a crock pot. I've got a front quarter and I've got a hind quarter of beef. I'm gonna show you some of the types of roast that you can get out of this hanging side, and then we're actually gonna take 4 of our top favorite roasts. We're gonna get them in crock pots, and we're gonna do some taste comparison. We're gonna do some bone in, boneless, etc. We're gonna start with the front quarter, and we're gonna break out some arm roasts and some chuck roasts, and we're gonna show you how to do it. I'm gonna get this guy on camera. You don't see him a whole lot. He certainly doesn't say a whole lot, but
YouTube?
He's a pretty handy guy to have around. This is your beef chuck. We have the shank. This portion is where you get your arm roast. This portion is where the shoulder blade is. This is where you get your chuck roast. We're just gonna start breaking it down. We typically get about 5 arm roasts off of a front quarter of beef. So those are our arm roasts. This is your chuck roast. You can see that blade bone in there. We're starting with the chuck roast. So let's just lay these out. There's this one, and then there's these that have the blade in them. Now, this isn't typically how we fabricate a front shoulder, because normally we're pulling the flat iron steaks, that top blade steak, removing that shoulder blade whole, and then we save the chuck eye. But we do want to do a side-by-side with the boneless chuck, which is the chuck eye roast, and the bone in, which has the blade in it. So that's why I cut it like this today. So to make this boneless and get that chuck eye roast, what I'm going to do is remove this piece of vertebrae bone here. And then we're just basically going to pull this center portion out, which is the chuck eye. So we'll just follow the blade bone, making it a nice boneless roast, taking the yellow cord out. Just make a nice boneless chuck eye roast like that. Now what I'll do is the same thing by removing this bone, but we will do something a little bit different with this one. Now both of these pieces will make a roast, and I will be saving this one for our meat case. However, for the video, we're just going to save one boneless chuck and one bone in. Now on to the arm roast. This is your classic pot roast. This has that round bone in there. That bone has that nice marrow in the center. Get all that nice flavor. And with this roast, just going to trim it up a little bit. We're going to cut it in half. There you have boneless version, which is this end, and a bone-in version, which is this end. Get a little bit of that bone dust scraped off of there. So this one right here is your classic arm roast, pot roast. Has that nice marrow in there. and then this one is your boneless version. So one thing we want to do with our comparison when we cook these is we want to judge these on, you know, the flavor based on bone versus boneless. You can see the chuck has a little bit more fat content in it compared to, you know, say maybe an arm roast where it's a lot leaner. But now we can typically get about 8 to 9 2 to 3 pound chuck roasts off of a front quarter of beef, and typically about 5 arm roasts. So a total of somewhere in the 12, 13 roast range off of this front quarter. I have my arm roast, my chuck roast out of the front quarter. Now it's time for the hind quarter. We're going to be pulling a round tip, also known as a sirloin tip, and we're going to be saving an eye of round roast. Now you have to understand that there's many types of roasts on this animal. You can certainly save just about any chunk and turn it into a roast. But today we want to show you, some of our favorites and some of the more popular roasts. That's why we chose the arm, the chuck, and the round tip, and the eye of round. So just start to pull this round tip out of here, finding that knuckle. This is where our tri-tip comes from, so we want to be careful that we don't damage that in the process. Continue to pull this down, finding those seams. Pulling that round tip portion right off of that hind quarter. That's where your tri-tip's located. We'll get that trimmed out later. This is your round tip. Talk about an excellent roast for barbecued beef. Incredible. Just a beautiful, nice round tip roast. We're going to add this to our pile, and I'll show you where the eye round comes from. Now that we have the loin broke off this hind quarter, we're just going to pull the round portion down. And we'll just start fabricating this round, seaming it out, locating that eye around in the middle of this. This round consists of 3 main muscles: top round, bottom round, eye of round. Like I mentioned earlier, you can certainly use any of those for the roast. Today, we're choosing the eye of round. We want to start by just removing the H-bone. Now we want to pull this femur out of this, making this a boneless round. Once you get this femur bone out, it's pretty easy to see the seams and where we need to dissect the eye of round from. Pull the heel. Just start locating these seams using your knife and applying some pressure reveals that seam. So like I mentioned, bottom round, eye of round, top round. This is your top, this is your eye, this is your bottom. So we'll remove the top round. Find the seam for this eye. And just pull that eye around out of there. Trim it up a little bit. We typically cut these about 2 to 3 pounds. This entire eye around is going to weigh somewhere between 4.5 and 5. So maybe we're going to cut the big portion. Maybe cut this end just a little bit larger so it's in comparison with the arm and chuck that we cut. So that's your eye of round. Let's get it added to the table. I have our roasts selected. They're on the table, and we're gonna cook Crock-Pot 4 of these. We're gonna choose a boneless chuck, which you see here, that chuck eye, and we're gonna do a bone-in arm. We're gonna do that eye of round and the round tip. So 4 of our favorite roasts that come off the front quarter, hind quarter. Like I said, there's many more. Pretty much if it's a chunk of beef, you can make it a roast. We're gonna keep it very simple. We're gonna put these in crock pots. We're gonna add some water. We're gonna cook them. We're gonna see the comparison. Now, I have a feeling that arm roast, that pot roast style with that bone and that marrow in there, that's gonna create some wonderful flavor. Stick around and we're gonna find out.
Where it all started, our original Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning. Described as hearty and mild, you cannot live without this spice, and here's why. You can literally use it on everything. A to Z, meat, seafood, chips, crackers, whatever is going into your mouth needs to have our original Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning on it. All right, we've got our roasts, and we're going to season them and cook them identically so that way we can get a true comparison on tenderness and flavor. Now, of course, we're going to incorporate some of the Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning into it, but we're just going to be using water because we don't want to use bone broth or anything that's going to affect flavor, because this truly is a cut, cook, compare on the tenderness and the flavor of the roast. So we've got 4 crock pots lined up. We're going to put them on low for about 10 hours. Let's just get started. I'm just going to put some original Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning on each roast. The roasts are 2 to 3 pounds each, so I'm just going to use a tablespoon or 2. Again, I don't have to be too particular, but just a way to get some flavor on these guys. And of course, any excuse we have to use our Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning is no excuse at all. Now I'm measuring this out. I'm just going to do 2 tablespoons per roast because I don't want to get one too heavy. All the roasts are about the same size. Seth, you mind lifting the lid for me down there, and I'll get started on the first one?
I can handle that.
This is the round tip roast.
My job's done with the cutting. All I have to do is this and then show up to eat.
I've got 4 cups of water in each crock pot. So we measured our water, we're going to measure our spice. Time is going to be exactly the same for each roast. That way we have a true standard on how much flavor we may or may not be imparting on the roast. And then we can find out if that bone-in versus boneless roast, if it has any effect. First one went in was our round tip or our sirloin tip. This is that eye around. Scott's hot tip. Use the roast itself as a mop up all that good flavor. In it goes. So those are the two hind quarter roasts, the sirloin tip, a round tip, along with that eye around. Then we've got our classic pot roast, the one with the marrow bone in the center. This chuck arm roast. So first two roasts were out of the hind quarter. This is going to be out of the front shoulder. All right, and finally, our boneless chuck eye. Now each roast is covered with the same amount of water, about 2/3 of the way up the roast. We're gonna put them all on low, and we're gonna let them go about 10 hours. And when we get back, we're gonna find out how tender, how flavorful, whether the hind quarter versus the front shoulder, whether bone-in versus boneless, what difference it does or doesn't make. 12 hours have passed, and oh my, the smell. We're going to start by putting our two, whoop, she's coming apart, our two hind quarter roasts on this tray. There's that sirloin tip. Get that eye around. Let's go for our front shoulder roast. Oh yes. Oh, I got it out in one piece. Just barely. There's that arm roast. All that marrow's cooked out. I can definitely smell a difference with that marrow in that one. There's that eye around. These chuck eye roasts in our shop, we put this net around them, kind of holds them together for uniform cooking. Whoops. And then it also, when you go to take it out of the Crock-Pot, it comes out in one piece. Ideally, if you cook a roast properly, it falls apart. So, we're going to use a couple of forks here to just show you a little bit of the different muscle fibers. This is that shoulder roast. Man, look at that. That's just pull apart. This chuck is where you're going to have some of those connective tissues, things that you might want to pull out. With regard to the front shoulders, you're going to have more connective tissues, etc., etc. But yeah, you can see those fibers there. Then of course here's our pot roast. Get that bone out of there. Here's some of that marrow. Again, you're going to have some more of those connective tissues. We'll find out if that flavor changed at all with that regard to that marrow. You can see that bone marrow there. We'll get some of that down in there. Pull that apart, let it cool a little bit so we can taste it. Then over here, this is our eye around. This is where you're going to find those real long, see how long those muscle fibers are? Those work great for usually like your barbecue type. And I can already note, like even if you look on the tray here, see how much juice that we have around this one, and then even this one too. That's because they have more fat in them, but especially that bone marrow. So we've got a lot more juice. And then over here, this is just, I can already tell it's just much more dry, which is to be expected. And then we have that sirloin tip. Seems very, very tender. I mean, I'm just barely pulling apart with them. Now, of course, we're doing this bare bones. Like, just the same way you can cut about any chunk of beef into a roast, you can cook a roast about any way. Vegetables, spices, browning the roast before we understand that we took a very basic approach to these roasts. as we intended, because we want to just have more or less a very basic platform so we can demonstrate the different tenderness and flavor. So it has just a little bit of our Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning. So don't roast us with cooking. We know we didn't do all the things that Grandma would do, but that's not the intent of this video. All right, Seth.
Something to keep in mind, we hear this all the time in the shop. My roast was tough. If your roast is tough, that means one thing.
You didn't cook it long enough.
Simply didn't cook it long enough.
So I think what we should do is just go through and just each take some of this and just kind of give our best on the fly opinion of what we got here. So starting with this boneless chuck eye, you know, this one would be, I guess, oh man, great beef flavor, tender, teeth cut right through it immediately.
Not super dry, just a really good, nice beef.
Not super dry, but I mean, keep in mind, we could just take some of that au jus from that and just pour it over top there, which we will. We're gonna be sharing these later today.
I think this one might take the cake.
We're gonna find out, especially if you get in here and you get a spot that has like, see how it has much more moisture on it right there?
Dipping into that bone marrow a little bit.
Definitely dramatic
Juicier.
difference in the, still got that great beefy flavor, but now it has like a little bit of a, like it actually coats your mouth a little bit with some of that marrow. It's almost a smoother flavor, richer flavor.
Get a hold of some of that bone marrow. Just put that bone marrow right there on your fork.
That'll make a puppy pull a freight train.
Oh.
Speaking of puppy, you want to pull a freight train, Charlie? Huh? You want to pull a freight train?
There you go, buddy.
There you go. Oh, good boy. Yeah,
that was good.
That's a difference maker right there.
Yep. That bone in there with that marrow makes all the difference in the world.
Now, I already know before we even get into this one,
it's gonna be dry.
It's gonna be dry. I can tell just by seeing it sit here. It's got these long fibers in it. This is a roast that when I personally cook it, I almost always make it into like a barbecued, I'll mix barbecue sauce in it at this point.
Get some Bearded Butcher barbecue sauce, our original, dump it in there, stir it up, make barbecue beef sandwiches. Hard to beat.
I'm not upset about the tenderness factor because I can just literally bite right through those muscle fibers. I am telling you, however, this is dry. This is also virtually no fat in this roast. There's a little bit of a fat cap, but flavor's great. Got those longer muscle fibers, even though they are tender, it is much more dry.
Yep.
Sirloin tip. Now, sirloin tip and the chuck eye both share that they can also be cut as steaks. This can be cut as like a sirloin tip steak. That can be cut as a chuck eye steak. So these are our two roasts that can cross over into the steak realm if they so want to.
Taste is the same. Tenderness is the same. It's just not as dry. My choice on the round is that round tip every time.
Yep. So sirloin tip, same flavor profile, very tender, not as dry as the eye round, but not as moist as the. So here's our recap. I put my number one on this bone-in chuck arm roast. Best flavor, best tenderness, perhaps a little bit more hassle if you want to deal with that bone, deal with those connective tissues in there. That's my number one. Number two is going to be this chuck eye. Again, it's got more moisture in it. It's got a little more flavor. Number three is going to be my sirloin tip. And number four is going to be my eye around. I can mix them up different ways, different occasions, but for a true pot roast, I'm going to go for one of these two. If I want more of a barbecue type, I'm going to go for one of the hind quarter roasts.
Hit the nail right on the head. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap these up, get them back in our crock pots, add some veggies to them, share them with family and friends throughout the day here today. It's a nice chilly morning. It's November in Ohio, a little frost on the ground. No better time than to get yourself a roast. Put it in a crock pot, add your favorite contents, veggies, noodles, whatever it might be. Make a family dinner. Gather around something that's just absolutely enjoyed by all.
There you have it. You saw the cut cook comparison of beef roast. Now keep in mind you can apply this to other animals as well. That front shoulder, hind quarter. When you're in the store choosing a roast, we hope this made a better choice for you so you can choose the right roast for you and your family, and you can have a nice cozy fall winter day eating roast just like this. We'll see you guys next time here on the Bearded Butcher's channel.
And if it's tough, you didn't cook it long enough. See you next time.